So before I get into the talk I had developed about the code of behaviour, as I said at the last webinar, we'll deal with some questions and feedback that we've had since. So there's only really 3 issues, because the others tend to refer to the policy document, which is in 2 weeks' time on the 25th of March. So the question, someone asked about the possibility of having ID cards for members, and we have been looking at that. We're looking at the plastic kind of credit card ID card or an electronic one. At the moment, the plastic ID card, I suppose, with the way the finances are with Scout in Ireland because of COVID, we'd have to wait. So we're kind of looking at an electronic version to see what we can do there, and we'll get back to you on that. So we are looking at that. Someone asked about getting a hard copy of the policies. You can print it off yourself. We haven't produced a hard copy this time because it's been reviewed again for May, as I said the last time in the last webinar, and we will be printing hard copies then after the review in May, because we'll be changing the presentation. The content won't change too much in the policies for May, I don't think. You never know what might come up between now and then, but I don't think there'll be any major changes. But the presentation of them will change. So we'll be printing them then. And one of the questions was, someone just came back into feedback from the last webinar that they were concerned about being a leader, and what about protection for leaders? And really, that's what this code of behaviour is all about. Our safeguarding is about safeguarding children and making sure they stay protected. People mention false allegations, false accusations, and so on. And while they have happened, they are very rare. They usually come about from some sort of a misunderstanding, misinterpretation. There may be someone who has mental health issues involved. But true false allegations are really very rare. But they do happen the odd time. So when we talk about protection for leaders, this code of behaviour, if you follow that, you should be protected if you stick to the code of behaviour, because it's all about how you speak to children, how you deal with them, supervision and not being found alone with a child and so on. And I'll cover that throughout the presentation. So don't be afraid of being a leader. Don't be afraid of false allegations. You really don't have anything to worry about if you're behaving properly yourself. A lot of them tend to come from a misinterpretation of someone who's not quite following policy. So this slide is just really the 4 documents that I was talking about today. Is about the code of behaviour to assist adults engaging with children in scouting. So the various sections that I want to talk about in the code of behaviour. One is the principles and the statement of commitment, and that's about our commitment to protecting children while they engage in our services. I'll talk about relationships and how we should observe relationships, and again that comes back to protecting leaders. But I think that's the last time I'm going to say that, because I don't want to make it about protecting leaders from false allegations. It's about protecting children from the risk of abuse. That's what safeguarding is all about. And if we do that properly, we don't have to worry about protecting leaders, because it's done by protecting children in the first place. An important chapter is supervision, because there's a big change there, really to do with the ratios in the dens and the quality of supervision. I'll talk about communication, both with parents and children. There's a transportation section in relation to how we should be carrying children in our own cars or not. Managing medications hasn't really changed. I'll just gloss over that. And social media hasn't really changed, because there is a new policy there that's in the pipeline. And the 7 points of behavioural awareness are the same as the code of good practice from before. They're very important points to remember. There are handy points to look at just to remind yourself about how to behave with children. So the principles of safeguarding. So we want children to have fun and learn in a safe and secure environment. Like the aim of Scouting Ireland is to enhance and improve society and children's lives in how we teach them the various skills that they're going to learn through their lives in Scouting. But if they're going to do that, we need to safeguard them properly to help them learn and develop in a positive way. And to do that, we have to always see that child welfare is the paramount consideration in all of the decisions we make about our interactions with children. Everything we do, we have to consider, is that appropriate to the welfare of children? So it needs to be a child-centered approach. In the groups, you need to listen to children, let them be heard and make sure they're respected, treat them with dignity and respect. That's really important for them, to let them be heard, let them feel that they have a say in how things are done in Scouting Ireland. While the adults might make the decisions, ultimately it's important that children feel that they're being consulted in relation to it. Confidentiality is a huge principle in safeguarding. There was one question, I didn't deal with it at the start because I said I'd wait till this bit with confidentiality. There was a question about when there are allegations, can it not be dealt with in the group first before going to national office with it? And the answer there is no. The concern, again, was about false allegations. But if you decide it's a false allegation and don't report it to national office, that's what caused all the problems in the last couple of years for Scouting Ireland, is people not doing that. You might be right, but you could be wrong. From my experience in the Guards, a lot of what people believe were false allegations came from a victim maybe didn't tell their full story and felt embarrassed about saying something, didn't say it, and the Gardaí would come back to them asking questions and start to wonder whether the victim is telling the truth when in fact they are. Some people might withdraw their complaint because they just can't go through with the procedure with the Guards or with TUSLA. They're just not ready for that, not able for it. And of course, the person who caused the abuse is going to say, well, I've been put into clear. And people who abuse children are brilliant at manipulation and grooming, and it's not just the child that they groom. It's all of the people around that child who could be protecting the child. So that includes everybody else in the Scout group. They're always going to seem like the nicest person, that there's no way they could ever do that because of the way they behave. And that leads people to think it might be a false allegation when in fact it's not. It's just that the victim isn't able to go through with the complaint. Safeguarding professionals like myself, Jill and Caroline have the training and the experience to deal with all of those cases and decide who should know about it. And under no circumstances should it be kept within the group and discussed within the group. Whoever finds out about it has to report directly to the safeguarding department. That's a really important principle of safeguarding. And of course, adhering to the safeguarding policies and procedures within Scouting Ireland is a major principle also. Okay, so when it comes to relationships, really the role of the Scouter is to be a positive role model for a child. And we have to conduct ourselves appropriately. And part of that is respecting boundaries between the Scouter and the child, ensuring that children understand those boundaries. We're treating children with dignity and respect. We're listening to children. If there is necessary physical contact, if that is necessary, make sure it's open and public, and make sure that you explain the nature and the reason for the physical contact, and obtain consent from the child also. So that's important. Be careful with physical contact. We're not saying it can't happen. It does need to happen. There'll be times when particularly the younger children fall and hurt themselves and they're upset and they're going to need a hug, but just do it in the open and public. Be transparent about it and let the child know what you're doing. So appropriate supervision then, it's all about being friendly with the children. If they're going to learn from us, we need to be positive with them and friendly with them, but we're not their friends. or the adults who are looking after them in scouting. So what scouters must never do, and I suppose it's important to point this out to scouters if you think that they're doing this unintentionally, seeking to control or create dependence in a child with a particular scouter. That should never happen. We can't tolerate favoritism among children. We can't engage in it. And likewise, we must never engage in or tolerate exclusion. And that can happen through bullying. So we need to be on the lookout for that and deal with that. We shouldn't be adopting harsh disciplinary regimes. Yeah, don't be harsh with children when they make mistakes or if they get a bit out of hand. And what you shouldn't be doing is engaging with children outside of scouting. But there are always going to be exceptions to that. Clearly, there are going to be parents in scouting whose children are in scouting, and they will be engaging with them outside of scouting. The children may also be in another organisation, GAA or a soccer club, that the scouter is a member of as well, and clearly there's going to be engagement. But the engagement is not to be private. It's not to be engaging on Facebook, Instagram, and all of those other social media platforms privately. That's really important to avoid that, and don't get caught up in that. So supervision is the big change in what was the code of good practice, now is the code of behaviour. We've introduced minimum ratios for den meetings. Someone had asked about putting the ratios for the den meetings and the outdoor ratios in the same policy, the same document. And we will consider that. We had considered doing it and left it out for now because the outdoor policy is being reviewed at the moment. But we will look at that in the future and making sure to maybe have the ratios in both. So when people refer to either document, they can see what the ratios are. So the ratios for dens, for Beaver Scouts, it's 1 scouter to 6, but you must always plan for a minimum of 2 scouters. So if you have 12 children, it's 2 scouters. If you have 6 children, it's 2 scouters. And once you go over 12, then you're up to 3 scouters. And the idea of that is to make sure that there's always enough scouters there in case something happens. It's just more likely that something will happen as the number of kids increases in a group, and that's why you need the extra scouters, apart from doing the activities with them and having scouters available to deal with them. Cub Scouts, again, the ratio is 1 scouter to 8 cubs, but again, it's a minimum of 2 to start with. And then for Scouts and Venture Scouts, it's 1 scouter to 10 scouts. Again, a minimum of 2, but it's 2 for up to 20 scouts as well. And then you add 1 on from then on afterwards. 3 scouters for 30 scouts and Venture Scouts and so on. And then there may be activities that are being done that require extra adults because the scouts have been broken up into smaller groups and you need adults to look after the different groups, particularly with the younger children. So plan for that. And something that I've mentioned a few times in various briefings is the quality and the experience of the scouters. Try to make sure that it's not 2 very young, very inexperienced scouters looking after children. Try to have one of the more experienced scouters there, and so the inexperienced scouters can learn from that experienced scouter. But it's not just about experience, it's about the quality of the scouter as well, because it's the same in all organizations. There's always someone who's been doing this for 30 years and they're still about the same as they were when they became a scouter at the age of 18, and they haven't really learned much. And they need to be looked after just as much as the children sometimes, but it's about making sure that you have a good scouter who's experienced with the inexperienced scouters, and don't have poor quality and inexperienced scouters without anyone decent there to look after them, to help them along. Gender appropriate supervision. There's a question there from someone about doing an activity for 6 to 8 hours, probably outside the den. And in fairness, the question is put very negatively. It's saying if we don't have a female scouter and we have a female, I think it's a venture scout, was the question. Does that mean we leave the female venture scout behind? It may be, but that's not necessarily the answer either. It's important to show a bit of imagination to figure out how you can get female scouters to come along to that meeting. There may be other female scouters in other sections in the group that can help. You may be able to get someone from another group. And just to give you an example, there was actually a group of ventures travelled over to the IOAC during the summer, and just one of the venture scouts was female, and it was, I think it was 7 or 8 male venture scouts, and it was 2 adult male leaders. And when the permission request came in, it was referred to safeguarding because there wasn't a female scouter travelling. But when I rang the group or the venture leader, I discovered that they had organised for a female scouter to be in the IOAC to meet with them, someone from Wexford, who stayed with the group then for the weekend. So there was someone available. So it's about making arrangements and planning for that. And the last thing, and this is all part of planning and risk assessment, is be prepared for when something goes wrong. Be prepared for absent scouters, maybe someone who could turn up late for a meeting, someone who has to leave early, or a child needing individual attention, who's had an accident and needs to be brought home, or God forbid needs to be brought to the ambulance. Plan for that and be ready to act when something like that happens instead of panicking when it does happen. So just think about that when you're planning for your numbers of scouters and so on in the group. When it comes to communication, first of all, with parents then, one of the questions I saw coming from the first webinar, or going into the first webinar, was about how are we going to inform parents and so on about the new policies. They are up on the website. It's the responsibility of group leaders and scouters to let parents know, make them aware of the policies and procedures, what they need to know, what to expect from the group, and importantly, what the group expect from parents. Parents need to be made fully aware of that. And a big part of communication with parents is making them feel comfortable approaching scouters. We'll always have a gruff scouter, and that happens, but it's really important that parents feel comfortable approaching someone in the section if they have an issue or need to talk about something to do with their child. So when it comes to good communication, it's all about being respectful, inclusive, age appropriate. So we're not just talking about communicating with parents here. When you're communicating with children, you use age appropriate language with the children. Make sure you have parental permission if you're going to contact the children about events. And try to do that within scouting channels and during scouting business as much as possible. And what's really important in communication is that scouters don't reveal much personal information to children, particularly in relation to phones, social media and so on. And keep your social media secure. You don't want children getting access to your phone if you've left it down and so on. Apart from the possibility that it could change the language to Russian or Turkish or something like that, there may be stuff on the phone that's appropriate for adults but not appropriate for children to see, and it's really important to protect the children from that. And the last thing about communicating with children in particular is don't allow them to friend or to follow you on social media. When it comes to transportation, not much has really changed in transportation. We've always needed to get the permission of the parent or guardian to transport children. One thing that is changed slightly, it's about avoiding transporting a single child. We should avoid that as much as possible. There's an exception there, that obviously if it's a scouter's own children, that a single child can travel with them. But scouters have to avoid bringing that single one child home from a meeting as much as possible. So try to have another adult or a minimum of 2 other children. So if your own children are there as well, that helps, because the final child is going to be in the car is going to be your own child, and so on. Just remember to plan that. And when it comes down to that, we have avoid transporting a single child. It doesn't say never. You should avoid as much as possible and plan to make sure that there's always going to be enough adults there. But if it comes to it and suddenly some child's parents hasn't collected them and it's lashing rain, you're doing a mini risk assessment there. Is it risky to bring the child home on your own, or is it more risky just to drive off and leave the child there? So that's just, it's a bit of common sense there. But you should always plan to make sure that there's 2 adults locking up the den when it's finished, in case something like that does happen. Have clear arrangements with the parents for pick-up and drop-off of the children. Try to use public or private transport options if you can. And I know this year money is going to be tight because there's less members in the groups, and the groups will be struggling with funding, just like Scouting Ireland nationally is. And that might not always be possible, but try, if you can, try to use public and private transport. If you are using options like that, ensure that the children are behaving appropriately and don't let down the Scouting Ireland name, don't let down your group name. Ensure, if it's your own vehicle, that it's insured properly and roadworthy. And again, make sure children use the appropriate restraints, such as car seats, seat belts, and so on. When it comes to managing medications, again, it's the parent and guardian's primary responsibility in relation to medications. So when it comes to filling in the form for activities, explain the need for medical details, that we're going to be looking after the children for whatever number of hours, maybe a couple of days. Explain the importance of full medical details. So you may get parents who just put down a type of medication and don't explain what it's for, and it might be a condition that the Scouters need to know a little bit more information about, so that they can look after the child properly. Not every medical condition is our business, but there may be some medical conditions that the Scouters need the information so that they can ensure the child is looked after properly on whatever activity it is that they're engaging in. And most importantly then, with parents, when you're arranging the handling and the administration of the meds, you do that in partnership with the parent or guardian. So it's important to speak to a parent or guardian about the handling and administration of certain meds. There might be some that are very obvious and it's not a big issue, but as much as possible with parents, engage with parents in relation to medical details and the administration of medications. So the social media hasn't really changed in the code of practice since the last time, because, as I said, there's a new policy there in the pipeline. So we ensure parents, guardians, children fully understand the social media rules. Ensure parents and guardian consent to the use of photographs by the group. Scouters, I said it already, keep your own social media secure. That's so important for your own well-being as well. And keep that social media contact, none of it outside Scouting. Don't go into private social media use with kids in your group. And there's that, as I said, there's that new internet and social media policy on the way. So there was 7 points of behavioural awareness, are something that have been in the code of practice for a long, long time, and it stays in the new code of behaviour. They're really good. They're just 7 points to read to remind you of how you should be acting with children. Act in an open and visible manner. It's very easy to just pick up a child or to talk to a child, try and do something privately with them because there's something wrong, but just have another Scouter there. Make sure there's another Scouter who has eyes on somewhere and can see what's going on. It might be that the child needs to say something private and so on, but have another Scouter there who can at least see what's happening. When it comes to And I suppose this applies to a lot of the games and the fun that goes on at the den meetings and other activities. That sometimes it's better not to join in that, because again, you're the adult who's there to look after the children. You're not their friend. You're being friendly with them. But be positive in your conversation when you're talking to the children. Always encourage them to do well rather than criticize them. Try and do it in a more constructive. If there is criticism, try and make it constructive and positive as much as possible. So if it's mixed gender sections, make sure you have mixed gender leadership. Have a personal awareness around yourself and managing your own emotions. We can have bad days in work and go to a meeting and we're not in the mood for the kids and so on. So just try and be aware of that. Just not to affect yourself and the kids really with cases like that. And when situations occur, just consider it for a second. Am I doing the right thing here? Am I doing the appropriate thing? And the last thing is to protect your good name. And that's really what the first 6 are about. Please don't approach safeguarding and working with children in the manner that you're just trying to make sure that you comply with regulations and protect your good name. If you look at it from the perspective that we're looking after kids and we're going to protect them and safeguard them, then most of it's going to come naturally to you. You don't have to start worrying about the regulations. So that's the bulk of the presentation. I'll just hand over to Jill now. I'll take this off sharing to see if there's any questions there that need to be answered, Jill.
Okay, hi guys. There are a lot of questions, they're flying in. A lot to do with ratios. They're all actually in the code there. You'll see, does the den ratio apply indoors? If the den has an enclosed grounds and the meeting is held there, does a different ratio apply? No, it's the same. It's more for the camping and out of doors is going to be the other ratio policy. Do Scouting Ireland prohibit the use of WhatsApp groups for scouts under the age of 16? I replied that really we ask for that usually groups or sections make up their own code on how they, if they're on camp, how they're going to use their phones, or they also have parental permission. So it's kind of like a group code that they should come with. Mike, is that you okay with that? Again, it's in the code. What about mobile phones in the den or on camp? So we advise that the use of phones is put in the section's own code. Again, same again. We used to be told that if a child came to you at the end of the night with an issue of abuse at home, then we should contact the guards and the group leader. Has this changed? And when do the safeguarding team get involved? If there's a child that you believe that is in any danger, you go straight to the guards. And you can notify Scouting Ireland thereafter. So there's, trying to see what else there is. There's quite a few. If we only have 4 venture scouts, will we now need 2 scouters? Might as well close that section. Mick, have you anything to say on that?
Sorry, what was that question again, Charlie?
If we only have 4 venture scouts, will we now need 2 scouters? We might as well close that section.
Yeah, you're going to need 2 scouters, but look to your group.
Yeah.
There may be people from the group who can come along for that meeting and so on from other sections in the group. Don't look at it negatively that you need to close down the group. Try and find another way of getting an adult to come to the meetings when you're struggling like that. Just the questions earlier on, the one about the ratios and the dens. The den is whether it's an indoor or there's an outdoor enclosed area with the den, the ratios are the same. That's why we've called it den meetings rather than indoor events, because some dens have the outdoor enclosures. And they're a good enclosed area as opposed to going camping or hiking, and that's why the ratios are like that. Okay.
Okay, so there's a couple of other questions that we will answer separately, if that's okay. We'll get back to you.
Okay.
And thank you for your questions.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. It's great to have people tuning into this. I'm only too happy to deal with groups at provinces, counties who have specific issues that they want to raise. Not necessarily safeguarding issues that have occurred, but just questions about the policy and how it's implemented and so on. I'll be only too happy to deal with provinces and counties in particular. But if you want to ring into the office or email into the office, please do. It's important for us that people make contact with us. We'd rather help people deal with issues before they become issues, really. And I'll just put that last slide up there for you before I close out. There we go. The next webinar is the 25th of March at 7 o'clock. Or sorry, the 25th of February at 7 o'clock. And you're all welcome to tune in. And any of the questions that we couldn't answer tonight there, we'll try and address them at the next meeting. Because I know some of them really referred to the policy that we're going to deal with at the next webinar. Thank you.